everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Seed Speaks. My name is Ashley Robinson, and I'm the editor of the Alberta Seed Guide. Today, I'll be acting as your host for this episode. On today's episode of Seed Speaks, we're taking a closer look at just how much sway ag producer and industry associations actually have in the political world. And I'd like to thank Janae Brady and Keith Currie for joining us today. And to those watching, please don't hesitate to ask any questions you may have for our guests in the chat box. And let's start with getting to know our panelists first. So, Janae, can you please tell me about your work at the American Seed Trade Association?
Sure. Well, thank you for the invitation to join you all today. I'm looking forward to the discussion. My name is Janae Brady, and I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for the American Seed Trade Association, or ASTA. And at ASTA, we represent around 700 member companies across the seed industry, from researchers to developers to companies involved in various aspects of seed production. And so my role is largely to advocate on behalf of the seed industry for federal policies for the organization. And we also work in state government affairs as well. And one other point that I would note is previous to working at ASTA, I spent almost a decade working on Capitol Hill, working for the Senate Agriculture Committee, where I worked with many trade associations from the government side of things. So have had the opportunity to work with associations on both sides. So thanks.
Thanks so much for being here, Janae. I know you're going to have some really great insights to share. And then our next guest, of course, is Keith. And thank you so much for being here. Can you tell me about your farm and what your role with the Canadian Federation of Agriculture is?
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm actually an eighth generation farmer from Collingwood, Ontario. And so that is about 2 hours straight north of Toronto. So anyone that's familiar with the Great Lakes systems here in Canada, Georgian Bay is part of the Great Lakes system, and that's where the area where my home farm is. So we grow mainly grains and oilseeds with a few acres of forages as well for hay production. And I'm currently the president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. So CFA is a national organization, as an umbrella organization of our farm organizations, national and provincial general farm organizations. And we represent roughly about 190,000 farm families from coast to coast and work on their behalf to make sure we have the right political framework in place for our farmers to be successful.
Thank you. And let's get going on the conversation because I know it's going to be a good one today. So first off, I'm going to start with a question for you, Janae. So I know, of course, that ASTA does a lot of political work, as you mentioned, and you guys even have an annual conference in Washington. Can you explain to me about what role ASTA has in politics, just in a bit more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. We play a variety of roles in politics, and that can go anywhere from working to influence legislation that has to do with our seed industry priorities, or engaging with agencies like the Department of Agriculture or the Environmental Protection Agency to try and advocate on behalf of regulations and policies that will work for our member companies. As you mentioned, Ashley, we have an annual conference in Washington, and try to bring our members in for what we call a fly-in, where we bring a large group of people in and divvy them up and send them into their individual state and district offices to talk one-on-one about their priorities. And then in addition to that, we try and bring in smaller targeted fly-ins to talk about more specific issues. So right now we are looking at the reauthorization of the 2023 Farm Bill, which is a large omnibus piece of legislation that covers all aspects across agriculture. And so we've had smaller groups of our members to come in and talk about conservation issues and agricultural research issues, international trade issues, to where we can really focus on the right members of Congress, the right chairmen and women and ranking members that really have a say in developing these policies.
That's all super interesting. And now, Keith, can you tell me a bit more about CFA? So I know you guys really act as a general counsel for Ag in Canada when it comes to politics. Can you tell me a bit more about the role that CFA has in Canadian politics?
Yeah, sure. And it's not dissimilar from what Janae just talked about, with the exception that, we represent all of agriculture. So, it does get very busy at times when you think about the fact that in Canada we have some 240, 250 different commodities that we're dealing with at any given time here in this country. So, we look at the general framework of farming and how it affects our producers across the country and how we need to influence either current legislation that's in place or legislation that's being proposed. And so, in Canadian politics, we have two houses federally that we deal with: the House of Parliament, where legislation gets passed through first, but then it also must get passed through our Senate, or the upper chamber, as we refer to it. So we work very diligently with members of not only elected members of the House and their staff, but also the appointed Senate and their staff, to make sure that our voice is heard on all these issues out there. And it at times it can be a little overwhelming when you think about all the things that are out there that can affect agriculture, but it's also very rewarding to know that you're going to have some influence on what takes place within the political regulatory framework here in Canada for our farmers.
Yeah, you guys definitely both are doing a lot of the similar work, but of course in your own jurisdiction. So I'm just going to throw out a general question, and whoever feels like can answer it. So how do your organizations plan or structure how you approach political issues?
I'm happy to jump in and talk about the way that ASTA handles some of our issues. And I think the first thing is there is no one way, depending on the issue. I think the first thing that we have to do is be sort of flexible and nimble, and be able to adjust depending on who is in power at the time, or which agency or which political issues it is that we are dealing with. But from our perspective, we have an incredibly talented staff at ASTA that are very technical in nature, with different components that we spend time advocating on behalf of. So we have folks that are focused on scientific policy. We have staff that are focused on international policy or phytosanitary issues, which are a major priority for the seed industry. We also have a communications shop, because advocacy is an important part of it, but messaging and communicating is really key to binding everything together. So when it comes to sort of structuring our approach towards things, it's all hands on deck, and making sure that we're all communicating with each other, and making sure that we're tying dots, or connecting dots, whether we're having conversations with members of Congress or with our own members of our association, to ensure that we're sort of all singing from the same songbook.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, CFA isn't dissimilar again in how we approach things. I mean, we have our annual general meeting every year, in which there are many resolutions passed, which form the basis of what our board of directors use to form the policy framework that CFA uses going forward. And then we adjust on the fly when we're dealing with any particular issue as they pop up. And usually when you're dealing with politics, it's reactionary, but we also try and be proactive on things so that we can get out in front of issues, so that maybe have a lot more impact on the ground, positive impact on the ground. And we work very closely with our national commodity organizations and their respective staff to make sure that we're all on the same page and we're getting the right information and taking the same approach. I agree with Janae that communications is key. Not only do we send our information, our newsletters, out to our elected MPs and staff, but also to the senators and their staff. But we also make sure that same information is getting into the hands of our membership too, our commodity organization partners and our own members, to make sure that they're informed on what's going on. So when these elected officials are back home in their home ridings, that our members on the ground can then continue to voice the same message to make sure that we are being heard as we need to be heard. And so it takes quite a team of people to make sure that this is done effectively. And it sounds really simple, and it certainly is not. But it's been effective, and we continue to lead the charge for Canadian farmers.
Thanks. And you did, of course, mention that communication is really key, and that also you guys build a lot of your policy decisions based on when you do have those AGM meetings. So can we just maybe go into a bit more depth on what kind of outreach you guys do with your members to explain political issues or find out what they're concerned about? And Keith, maybe I'll let you lead off on this one, then Janae can follow up.
Yeah, for sure. And I mentioned our resolution process at our AGM, and that's certainly the real crux of formation of our direction is coming from our grassroots members to help form the policies that we use going forward on behalf of all farmers. But we have a very structured communication team that has a weekly newsletter that goes out to right across the country, and it not just goes, as I mentioned, not just goes to our members, but it also will go to all our political people that we needed to get in the hands of. And we also through a campaign we did during COVID called Food for Thought, where we were trying to raise awareness to the consuming public about why it's important to make sure agriculture stays strong so that we can keep food rolling and food on the table for you during tough times of COVID. We established an even larger, robust email base that we can now send those newsletter out to Canadian consumers right across the country so that they are aware of what's going on within agriculture and within our organization. So that has become a very useful tool for us. And of course, we are looking to our membership to amplify that, as I mentioned earlier. So, we are very active on social media, all the different platforms on social media, and, doing podcasts and broadcasts and events such as what I'm doing right now is just another way to outreach to people about what CFA is doing for them.
Thank you. And Janae?
Yeah, and I think on the seed side, we're not unlike Keith's organization in that we represent a very diverse membership. Seed is not uniform across the industry, so we really have to be able to track a lot of issues, whether we're talking about traditional row crop issues or whether we're talking about conservation seed or even if you're getting into the types of seed like organic versus biotechnology or gene edited. And in order to be able to really track those diverse issues, we work through committees of our own membership. We have committees like Plant Breeding Innovation Committee or international, regionally focused committees or conservation and environment focused committees. So as an example of how we utilize those committees, as I mentioned, getting ready for our 2023 Farm Bill priority and reauthorization, we knew that conservation issues were going to be especially important right now with all of the emphasis and focus on sustainability. For us, the environment seed and conservation seed, like cover crop seed as an example, is a major part of that sort of effort. So we pulled together a task force specific to those issues and had members that are experts on those issues and really the boots on the ground. And they helped us develop our policies. So they helped us come up with what our asks were going to be, what our gaps and needs are. And then we, in turn, as the government affairs team at ASTA, work to progress those priorities and kind of put them into action through our conversations on Capitol Hill. And we do that across the board, on all of those different issues. Some are standing committees that are long time parts of ASTA. Some, as I mentioned, with the conservation group, sort of are put together for specific issues, and then we move on to other areas as well.
Thank you. Definitely a lot of work that you guys are really in the midst of doing right now. And I think my next question, I'll first have you answer. So, of course, you're right now in the midst of approaching politicians, I'm sure, to talk about the Farm Bill. And so how do you approach politicians and how do you get them to listen to you?
Every way that we possibly can. So, we do our traditional outreach on setting up meetings with congressional staff and with congressional members on Capitol Hill, whether it is just ASTA staff that are engaging and educating on issues. We love to bring our own members to town so that they can really speak from their experiences. We always encourage our ASTA members to invite members of Congress or government officials to their facilities, to their operations for educational opportunities, and to really help those policymakers understand the areas that they're developing these policies in. We work through political action committees where we are able to attend, member one-on-one events and engage on issues that way. The shift in, the virtual world that we are in has really opened up even further opportunities. When members of Congress traditionally were in Washington, D.C. for a week, and then they would go home to their districts for a week. And Now, to some extent, they're even more accessible because you're able to organize, virtual calls and virtual meetings. So really, we look for every opportunity to engage with those policymakers.
That's all super interesting, especially when you're looking at how we are a more connected world in some ways. So it doesn't really matter where you're located. As long as you have access to internet, you can connect with anyone anywhere in the world. It's amazing. Sometimes it's hard with time zones, but we can usually sort it out. And Keith, how do you guys go about approaching politicians then and making sure that they listen to you?
Yeah, well, I'm very fortunate that the CFA is an 80-plus-year-old organization that's well established and well known in the political realms, and that certainly has, that credibility has led to opening doors, and we are trying to meet on a regular basis with all politicians, and our job is to lobby, and their job is to make sure that they are listening to everybody out there. But having said that, the regular politicians are lobbied 10 or 12 times a day. So how do you make that difference so that you're heard, and that your issues are heard and they're understood? And a lot of that depends on how you build the relationships with those individuals in particular and the governments that are in place. And so there is a lot of time and effort putting into establishing those relationships, because if somebody doesn't like you, they're not going to either speak to you or they're not going to listen to you. So you have to make sure that you yourself are credible and that they trust in what you say is something that they can believe in and they can take forward. And so it's that building of relationships, because people on the other side of the table that I'm sitting at, they're humans too, and they want to know that they can work with you, and that's really what we're looking for, is that partner approach. We try and express the fact that what they're doing has to be practically implemented on the ground, or it's just not going to work. And when you take the right approach and bring suggestions and ideas that will fit into their plans, that's much more helpful. So it can be a process, but we also reach back into our membership who maybe have a good relationship with a particular elected official, and we bring them along for that comfort aspect of what we're doing. And so it's an ongoing process every day, building those relationships and opening the doors and starting to talk on all the different issues that we do have to talk to. Because when I say I'm a farmer and I'm lobbying on behalf of farmers, people think I'm dealing with an agricultural ministry, but the reality is we deal with finance, and we deal with labor, and we deal with transportation, we deal with infrastructure, we deal with global affairs or trade. It goes on and on and on and on, and so we have to have that broad depth of relationship across whole of government to make sure that we're getting what we need is right for our farmers. So it's an ongoing process, and that's what makes this job both challenging but also interesting, because we do get to meet with a lot of really interesting people. And the biggest challenge that we see in all this, and I know that's probably what we'll get into later, but is do they understand agriculture at all? And so that's our job when we're lobbying, to make sure they understand agriculture.
Yeah, you both said some really interesting points there. And I think one of the things that really stuck out to me was about that relationship building. It's not just sitting there talking to politicians being like, these are my priorities, just laying them out. You also have to really be working to build that relationship and also teach them about the background before you sit down and have those in-depth conversations. I know both Janae mentioned about how they encourage their members always to invite politicians for tours of their facilities and stuff. And Keith mentioned about how if they do have a member that's maybe like, if you're looking at a local MP or something, and you have a member that is living in that riding, having them along sometimes just for comfort helps with that relationship. So you guys really both stress that relationship building, which I don't think we always think of when it comes to lobbying or working on politics. So let's get into talking a bit more about what are some examples of issues that you've seen success with in your lobbying work, and how did you guys get that success? Was it through that relationship building, or were there other things that you guys had to do?
Yeah, I can jump in there, because you're absolutely right that relationship building is really the most critical function of my job. Again, going back to my experience previously as a staffer working on Capitol Hill, there were more often than not, many times where I did not understand an issue or did not know an issue, and you really need to know the right people to call to be able to help you through that. And fortunately, there were organizations like ASTA that were, there at the ready. And so then moving over to the ASTA side of things, that's really what we strive for, is to be a resource for those on Capitol Hill and for those agencies. And you do that through building those relationships, as you just said. As far as examples of successes, I think one of the, these are all always ongoing and continued efforts, but one of the top priorities for us, whether we're talking about the Farm Bill or whether we're talking, more broadly across other policy areas, is agricultural research and ensuring the support for research programs, investment into research programs. Again, this is something that we're continuing to work towards, but because of the work that ASTA has done in trying to be that resource and provide educational information, we've had the opportunity over the last year to have witnesses at multiple congressional hearings. We had a witness last December at the Senate Agriculture Farm Bill hearing on research, and then we had another witness just a couple of months ago at another Farm Bill hearing with the Senate that was focused on horticulture policies. But in both of those opportunities, we were talking about really how long it takes to really be able to develop innovative and quality products for producers to really get the most out of the seed that they plant on the ground. So just the fact that we've been able to have multiple opportunities where the congressional staff and members have come to us and asked for our voice to be heard, that's really the best example of success that I can provide.
Thank you. And I really find it interesting how you talked about that you guys worked and of course, ASTA is an established organization. So you guys have worked to become that resource. And I know Keith mentioned earlier about how CFIA is also an established resource. So that is part of how you guys do get your voice across and make sure that people are listening to you. So Keith, what would you like to add there?
Well, I can't add a lot to expand on where Janae was at, but I mean, we continue to work on the right framework, and sometimes you're working on preventing bad framework. I mean, that's just as important as well. And, a prime example is, here in Canada, we have a price on carbon, we have a carbon tax. And, the problem for farmers with the carbon tax is we are one of the very few industries where we cannot pass on our prices. Our prices are set by markets. We're price takers, not price setters. So every time there's an additional cost, we can't pass that on. If you're a McDonald's or a Walmart or, pick your store, you put another nickel on every product going out the door to cover those extra costs. But, as farmers, we can't do that. So we lobbied hard to get a farm fuel exemption from the carbon tax, and we were successful in getting it on a number of fuels, but we still didn't get it on them all. And we continued to lobby to the point now the bill is in the Senate, but it's virtually almost gone through, where we will now get an exemption on all farm fuels from the carbon tax. So, doing things like that where we can explain how it's beneficial to the farmer, because the money that I'm not spending on that carbon tax, I'm reinvesting into my farm to even be more efficient and produce more product for consumers. And also, working with the general public. We had a government that was looking at fertilizer emissions reductions, but the way they framed it when they brought it out sounded like it was going to be a reduction in fertilizer, and we had to make the public understand that if that goes through, that means a reduction in food produced, and that would lead to food insecurity. And so that led to conversations about changing the narrative around goals set on nitrous oxide emissions. So, small wins like that, most people don't see, but they are very big to everybody that's out there. So, we're always on guard for what's going on, and we like to introduce legislation that's beneficial to us, but we also want to prevent the bad stuff from going through as well. So it's a daily struggle. Janae can relate to plant breeder right issues around seed, and we've had some successes recently on making sure that we were protecting the farmers, but not jeopardizing the integrity of the seed producers through the process. So that takes education of our elected to understand how that all can work together, and that's what we do on a daily basis.
Thank you. You did touch a lot on the struggles and stuff that you face, and you mentioned before about how when people farmers or anyone working in ag don't always think, that associations like yourselves and Janae's are not just talking to people that deal with you're not just talking to the USDA or Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, you're talking to the other departments too that may not have that agriculture base. So maybe I'll have you answer this first, Keith. What struggles have you guys faced when it comes to lobbying?
Well, I think the single biggest struggle that we face is just simply the lack of understanding what agriculture is all about by the people that we're talking to. Here in Canada, we're looking at about 1.6% of the population that actually is involved in agriculture, or even in rural Canada, where the majority of our population is disconnected. It's not their fault; they don't know that, but they don't know what all is involved in agriculture and really how it touches their lives. And so that's part of the struggle is when you're lobbying on a particular issue, there's an education piece to this that has to start first so they understand where you're coming from. And we've worked very closely in the last number of years to really align ourselves with not only farm organizations but also the whole agri-food industry and in particular, like all the industries beyond the farm gate, because our success is dependent on their success and vice versa. So we are aligning closer with the agri-food industry to help further that education piece, in particular on why it's important from a social aspect, from an environment aspect, and an economic development aspect that the agri-food industry is healthy, and that starts on the ground with the farmer. So I would say that's probably our single biggest struggle that we deal with is making sure people understand what we're talking about on the political side. And, of course, we always are dealing with geopolitics, both nationally, subnationally, and internationally, that do affect what we do. And sometimes that gets very frustrating. The partisan politics is real, and it's something that we have to deal with on a daily basis. And, it might change your strategy and how you go about tackling any particular issue at any given time.
Thank you. And Janae, what are your struggles that you face?
Yeah, I agree, wholeheartedly with Keith on one of the biggest challenges being that educational piece and the really lack of understanding on the role that we play in ensuring, food security around the world. So that is certainly a major one. The other one that I would point out that is significant as well is just the challenging ability to get your priorities forward when there are so many priorities that are out there, whether it's other agricultural organizations or sectors outside of agriculture. There are just so many needs and so many priorities that you're competing for attention for, and that can be challenging to try and make sure that yours is moving to the top at the right time. And then the last thing that I would say that can certainly be a challenge in our space, and it kind of goes back to the education side, is we work in some issues that are very technical and very challenging to understand for those of us that are in this job full time, let alone those that are on Capitol Hill or in agencies that are juggling so many different issues. So really being able to speak to why certain regulatory changes are needed or why these things matter to everyone, to farmers, to the folks that are buying their food at the grocery store. It can be a challenge to translate some of those technical issues into the really common language that your general consumer is going to understand.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question, which really gets down to the point of what this whole conversation has been about. Do you feel your organization has a voice in politics? Are you able to enact change for your members? And Janae, I'll let you go first.
Well, I'll give the short answer, which is yes, we certainly do have a voice. That doesn't mean that it comes without challenges, and sometimes it can feel like you're not being heard. But working with our partners in across the industry and with our own members, we have been able to enact change and move towards the direction that we want to go. But all that to say, we all still have a lot of work to do, and that's something that we're going to have to continue to make sure that our voices are continue to be heard into the future.
Thanks. And Keith,
Yeah, and I would agree with Janae. I mean, we do feel that we are effective and we are having successes. There are lots of days that are frustrating, but overall, the general public has an inherent love of agriculture, even though their ideology of what it means or what it is may not be what the reality is, but they do genuinely love agriculture, and that's reflected within the elected. They are big fans of agriculture. It's just, as we said, that lack of understanding sometimes gets in the way of getting stuff done quicker. But it's about eating the elephant one bite at a time. It's a marathon, not a race. But and we have to keep that in perspective when we're going to do the lobbying. But we are making a difference. And we look back. I look back on my team at CFA, and we got some incredible people that are doing a lot of work, and it shows in the results that we're getting. So it's a lot of work, but at the end of the day, it is gratifying when you get those wins.
Thank you. And thanks to the both of you for being here today. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. So thank you to Janae and Keith for being here. I really enjoyed our conversation and I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to digging a bit more into it when I write up the story afterwards. And for those watching, thank you for tuning in. And if you missed any part of today's live stream, don't worry, we'll have it available on demand on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And if you have any questions about the subject or ideas for future topics we should tackle, please send a message to Seed World's Facebook page or reach out to myself. And next week, make sure to tune in as Mark Zinkowitz has some guests on to chat about the Canadian gene editing decision. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.